What's up, cinephiles? My name is TJ, and welcome to Cinemateq. And it is time for another edition of Nostalgia Goggles, the second episode. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about the 1994 film Double Dragon, a movie that was very near and dear to me as a child. And to help in the discussion, I have Sandra and Tim with me. Hey guys, what's up?
Hey.
Hi, TJ.
How you doing?
Good.
Great.
Any initial thoughts about Double Dragon? I know we don't like using evaluative language on this channel, but maybe use this as an opportunity to just give your general feelings and don't worry about having to justify them with film talk.
It was everything my practical effects dreams could ever be like. I loved it completely.
So you have very low budget
yeah.
practical
I
effect
love
dreams.
that stuff. It's amazing.
It was a rich tapestry
Yeah.
of CGI, a true blend of
Yeah.
CGI, composition, and practical effects. Yeah.
Everything
that 1994 could give you, it gave you.
I was actually kind of impressed with the comp work that they did to get that river looking like it was in LA, like the river had actually.
Yeah, those matte shots were amazing. Like the Man Theater just like happened to be on the side there, or the Chinese Man Theater was great. I was just like, I backed it up a couple times. I was like, hey, somebody worked hard on that. That's great.
Someone put effort into this film,
Someone
thankfully.
did.
So we, of course, are going to be discussing the film. We're going to try to not use that pesky evaluative language and just talk about the film as it is. But first, we need to go over the plot, I think, because some people may not have seen this and they need a little bit of an anchor.
And even if you have seen it, you might need a real quick refresh.
That's true. I probably saw this film for the last time before watching it for this when I was maybe 16. So that's that's 15 years ago-ish. And it was on VHS. I was saying to Sandra before the show, this was actually the first time I've seen the film in widescreen because every screening before it had been on VHS, which is 4:3. Yeah.
And do you remember the circumstances of watching it? Did you pick it out at the video store yourself, or was it a birthday party? Or
So, okay, maybe we should start there. How this film was a part of my childhood. I actually don't know when it entered my life, but I do know that I owned it on VHS, and it was a regular movie that I would rewatch over and over and over again, to the point where myself and my friends would quote this film pretty heavily to each other. Most specifically, the line, "I can see you, no you can't," and then the guy getting hit in the eye. We wouldn't actually hit each other in the eye with poles, with like steel iron rods, but the thought was there.
I really do feel someone should do a supercut of all the one-liners in this movie, because it's the entire dialogue is nothing but one-liners. It's pretty impressive, actually.
The character who I just referenced who got stuck in the eye, I kind of want someone to do a supercut similar to what you're talking about, but just putting all of his dialogue lines over top of like that little creature dude that Jabba the Hutt has, because his laugh and the laugh of that little creature are eerily similar.
Salacious Crumb, I believe you're referring to.
Yes, that is the thing I'm talking about.
Oh, that's great. I recognize that guy from, like, there are tons and tons of recognizable actors, like character actors, action, it's like stunt choreographers and that sort of business, and we'll get into that, I'm sure, but he was one where he screamed 90s for me. He was just that sort of wacky, crazy, like, wild 90s guy who, like if you can imagine some kind of sugary drink or candy ad in a comic book, it was like a fisheye lens from a high angle, guy with a huge face, like thrusting the item at you. That is that guy. I don't know what it was, but he was just like, it's radical and you're gonna love it. And he had a mohawk as well, so it was like an 80s 90s mashup. It was beautiful.
I could totally see him being in that kind of ad, and it would make me want to buy whatever he's selling. He seems so trustworthy. Yeah. So, the plot of this film, and unfortunately I don't have anything written for this, so it's coming right off the top of my head. But we start, I believe the term is actually somewhere in China, and there's a lot of people attacking a lot of other people, and these people who are all dressed in black, you can tell that they're bad people because obviously they are dressed in black. They're trying to find the Double Dragon medallion, a medallion that would bestow on its owner great amounts of power.
Can I stop you very quickly?
Of course.
Because there is a voiceover, if I'm not mistaken.
There is at the very beginning.
I was going to
That
say.
Robert Patrick, and so he solemnly intones a little bit of the history of the Double Dragon medallion. And there's a point that I wrote down that I was like, but we never got back to that. What does that mean? Where he mentions, I believe, that the king sacrificed himself in order to imbue this double dragon medallion with the power of the soul and the power of the body. But then he gives it to his sons, and then he goes on, and I was like, but how did he sacrifice himself? Like,
he probably just stabbed himself in the stomach or in the chest or something.
Okay.
The classic.
Just ritual
in
sacrifice.
in the ancient Chinese way of sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly like that.
So that's how you imbue ancient artifacts with powers. Okay.
Yes. So this opening scene does have that framing device of Robert Patrick's voiceover. It continues after the scene is over. One of the evil bad guys sees a monk running away, follows that monk, and is able to find one half of the Double Dragon medallion. That person, who's revealed to be Lash, I believe is the name.
Based on the character from the video game, Linda Lash. Correct.
Yes. Excellent. And it's at that point that we realize that we are actually in sort of the present day. Because before that, this could easily just be a fight in ancient China. So now we know that we're kind of in the future because Lash pulls out a satellite phone and lets Shuko know that she's got it. Moving on.
No. You skipped right past the satellite uplink phone because it like flips open in this amazing.
It's a plot synopsis, Tim. We can't just boil down on everything right now.
Okay, we're gonna come back to the satellite uplink though.
Okay, let's try to get through this plot synopsis quick. So, flash forward, we are introduced to Billy and Jimmy Lee. Jimmy is the level-headed, good-thinking one, and Billy is the little
hotshot rebel,
little jerk who just does whatever he wants. They're in a martial arts competition. They end up losing because of Billy's stupidity.
Hotshot rebelness.
That as well. And we're also introduced to Satori, who is their surrogate mother. The film continues on from there. Shuko, who is played by Robert Patrick and who is delivering that wonderful voiceover that we were talking about, gets his half of the Double Dragon, embodying him with the power of the soul, which allows him to just jump into people and take over their body. And the rest of the film essentially centers around Shuko attempting to get the other half of the Double Dragon medallion from Jimmy and Billy. Unfortunately, along this little journey, Satori is killed. After that, the boys meet up with Alyssa Milano's character, whose name escapes me, but she is the leader of the Power Corps.
I believe her name is Marion.
Yes. Her
Once
name
again, based on the video game.
Yes, her name is Marion, for sure. Tim, I'm so excited for you to talk about the video game. You seem just so eager to get into that.
Double thumbs.
During all of this, there is a kind of gang war going on in New Angeles, 2007. I'm just skipping all of the relevant details. So the film takes place in 2007 in a place called New Angeles, the former Los Angeles. It's what the city was renamed after a powerful earthquake just kicked the shit out of the entire city. A lot of the landscape of the Los Angeles no longer exists or is underwater or is easily flammable or is being held up by large jacks from New Jack City, of course.
See, this is why it's so hard to synopsize this movie, because there's so many moments where you're just like, oh, and then the best part of that scene was...
and then this happened, and then this happened. So Shuko's chasing them, and as part of what happened with these earthquakes is that it led to essentially a gang uprising, which really isn't explored much, but we're given the aftermath, where the police own Los Angeles in the daytime, and the gangs own Los Angeles in the evening. So no one ventures out past curfew, otherwise you might get your shit messed up by a gang, which no one wants. No one wants that at all. So that leads into some things which we might get into later in the discussion, but for now, it's just best to know that this movie is essentially about Robert Patrick trying to track down a couple of kids, a role that he is very familiar with, actually, if you go back to his T-1000 days. And eventually the film climaxes with a final fight between Billy, Jimmy, and Shuko that Shuko loses because he doesn't have a brother to share the power with, I guess. And that is where it ends. I feel like that was a terrible plot synopsis, and you might be better served just go reading the one that's on Wikipedia. But I felt it was too long, and I didn't want to read it out loud. So
I think they screwed up in the first sentence anyway, so...
That was the IMDb one that they screwed up in the first sentence.
No, see, you're coming out ahead of IMDb, which is not that hard to do, but it's
true.
I mean, we want to encourage people to go watch the film themselves, so...
Yes, that's the whole point of this
Exactly.
podcast. Go
And
and watch
should.
the film and make your own decisions.
Disregard the fact that this film has a 3.7 rating on IMDb, and
What do
just
they know?
do yourself a favor and go watch Double Dragon.
Yep.
Exactly.
Out of all, I would actually say, before we get into not speaking evaluatively, I would like to say before we start using or not using evaluative language, as far as video game movies go, this is better than Mortal Kombat, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people look at Mortal Kombat as like the early 90s standard bearer as best video game movie.
I might have to disagree with you strenuously on that one, but I'm sure that's a discussion for another podcast.
It would be another podcast.
Yeah.
Because on this one, we don't use the evaluative language. I need to use a different term for that, I think.
No, I think you're doing really well.
Yeah, do you think that works? That's okay. Okay. Well, in that case, we leave it all behind and we start the very academic discussion about Double Dragon. So, who would like to start off with a point from the film that they wanted to address? Because I have some things I want to talk about, but I've been talking for a long time now, and I want to open this up to you guys. Let's get this going.
For me, I noticed a lot of different points of things that were good parallels between the current times, i.e. the time we're living in right now, 2019, and in the film, in terms of climate change. It was an interesting parallel that like that future that they were kind of suspecting or like depicting on screen was, you know, kind of the same as what we're kind of anticipating if we don't get our shit together. But I do love the little intricate details that they put into that.
In regards to climate change?
Yeah, like how they are combating it or like helping themselves get through it. Like the jacks keeping the buildings up and like
This is how we live now. So
Yeah,
everyone
it's just-
every
it's
building,
normal.
every basement
It's
comes with a
fine.
jack and
Yeah.
a guy to operate it as well. Yeah.
That was kind of a funny little moment. During the martial arts competition I mentioned right at the start of the film, there is an earthquake and there's a guy who gets on.
No, I'm gonna have to cut you off. The announcer comes on deliberately and he says, "Don't worry, guys, it's not a quake. It's just an aftershock. We can continue the martial arts tournament."
No, but then that guy who works there gets on the jack and starts pumping it
Yeah,
up.
well, yeah, because even the aftershocks are a little problematic for all that damage.
But then after
they
that-
specifically say it's not an earthquake. It's just a little aftershock. Don't worry, guys.
But after that point,
so
the jack technology is like never really used. And so it's something that is set up in the very early part of the film. And like this also happens in the scene, I think right after it or right before it, when Shuko says, "Oh, what? Are you just afraid of a little aftershock?"
Yes.
And so you think that aftershocks are going to play a large, that they're going to be in the film quite a bit.
I thought
and
for
they're
sure
not
the
really
medallion
there.
was going to be on a precipice somewhere, and then it was like, oh, the bad guy's about to get it, and Billy can't reach it, and then all of a sudden you have an aftershock and it falls into his hand. I thought for sure that was going to happen.
Nope. Chekhov's aftershock.
No, yeah,
Chekhov's aftershock did not pay out.
But yeah, very quick shout out to the guy operating the jack, because
Yeah.
he, despite all the brouhaha and kerfuffle that went on during that martial arts tournament, including Billy flat out not cheating, but beating the crap out of the guy after the tournament was over.
He gave him like a noogie or something.
No, he got disqualified for the noogie. I had that one too. Apparently, noogies.
Right, we can't make that.
Flying noogies are an automatic disqualification, automatic DQ on that one. So he got disqualified. The guy gave him some lip when he had his trophy, and then Billy just sucker punched him. And then I think the crowd ran in and was like very happy that this happened.
Well, they wanted to fight.
They were just happy to have the fight. Yeah,
They had spent all night watching this martial arts tournament, and they were just like, "All right,
yeah,
it's
bare
time
knuckle,
for
too.
fisticuffs."
It was rough looking, yeah. But dude working the jack was just he was not leaving his post. He was making sure that ceiling of the basement or wherever they were
You
was,
can't have a
was
martial
staying
arts
supported.
tournament or a brawl at a martial arts tournament if the roof collapses.
Yeah.
So is he the real hero of the film?
I
He
think so.
is.
I'm also not sure that's how jacks work. I think you're just supposed to get it to one point and then leave it
and then
alone. He
leave
seemed
it.
to be like
He's
pumping it. Like
pumping.
if I stop pumping it, bad things will happen.
He knows more about the technology than we do. So I think we have to defer.
He's
to
living.
his
He's living it
expertise.
right now. Yeah.
So aside from the jacks, what other kinds of technology are we talking about as far as our terrible climate future?
The car, that it was powered by like garbage, I think.
Yes,
you
it
were
was
just
garbage.
dumping garbage into this incinerator that would make your car run. That is just genius.
So the thing that I kind of took away from this is that oil is no longer being refined in any way, and perhaps that has something to do with the big quake that took out California. And so they haven't gone far enough to use like other types of energy to run cars. It's still internal combustion. So they just had to jerry-rig and retrofit every car they could find. And the one thing that was in plentiful abundance is just garbage.
was newspapers on the side of the road that you could just pluck out of barrels while you were driving at breakneck speeds away from bad guys.
Yeah. And it was kind of really drove home this idea that the future is like just a dirty place.
So
Yeah.
dirty.
Yeah.
So
But
dirty,
it's also like if they're using the garbage to fuel their cars, then they're picking up the litter on the ground.
You'd think
and
it'd be cleaner.
cleaning up the earth.
It's like if that's the resource, if that's like the currency of the day, you'd think that it would be more of a valued commodity, but it's just lying on the road, man.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Eventually, they will name that car though the Dragon Wagon, which is great. But it doesn't make sense until it has the paint or the decals or however they.
Well, I think
modified
it's
it.
only called the Dragon Wagon when it has those things on
Exactly.
it. Yeah,
Exactly. That will be the car to be one day known as the Dragon Wagon, and I do not know. Okay, we'll get to that towards the end, but it's like when did that happen? When did somebody paint the Dragon Wagon's dragon stuff on
Well, the
it?
Power Corps did that because they're into graffiti.
I guess so. Yeah, they just happened upon it during the big battle. There were like a group of graffiti artists who were just like, "Hey, let's have."
Well, remember-
I think these guys. I think this car belongs to the guys who are fighting in there.
Well,
let's
Tim,
fix out his car.
as I push my glasses up that don't exist, if you'll remember earlier in the film when they're being chased by one of the gangs known as the Mohawks, the Dragon Wagon crashes, and then Bobo, the leader of the Mohawks, comes out and is about to fight Billy and Jimmy, but then the Power Corps come in and intercede
Yes.
on the Dragon's behalf.
They just turn around, in fact, because
Yes.
they were blending in with the graffiti on the wall, just standing there for hours, days even.
They knew. Perhaps they are
They knew.
prophetic. I don't know.
Somebody always comes down this alleyway, and we either help them or we rob them.
So then, oh wait, you know what? I was just gonna say like, oh yeah, then the Power Corps obviously finds the car there, but then they actually use it to get home, and then
Yep.
we get that great line
Yep.
later in the movie when Jimmy or Billy refers to the engine as being grilled cheese because the thing they exploded in it to go really fast to escape the Mohawks was actually compressed cheese, if
That's right.
I remember correctly.
That said very clearly, do not combust on it. And I don't know about you, but all my pressurized cheese whiz comes with that warning in big bold letters.
Of course. So at least that's something in the film that we can point to as being a payoff, using
Yes.
the cheese can and then having grilled cheese engines.
No, this movie, I have to say, like for all the cheesiness, if you will, and like the corniness and the one-liners and just the batshit insanity goofiness, it does other than like what we talked about in terms of the aftershocks, it does tend to follow the rules of setup and payoff pretty well, and it tracks, I guess, into like that nothing is completely like it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense because of this or anything like that. Like they do seem to follow a certain logic that they set up at least in this world. It's just a kind of a batshit crazy logic.
Yeah.
But everyone agrees with it, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Sandra, was that all of the technologies for climate change, or at least trying to control the environment so no one in New Angeles perishes?
From what I can remember, but there was the news broadcast too, which I kind of
Yes.
wanted to touch on because I love those so much. Those segments were the best. I know we're not supposed to use evaluative language, but
How dare you.
we'll make an exception.
If you say so.
This is my podcast now.
And there it is. I've lost my throat.
Didn't take that long. Only 2 episodes.
Yeah, not
Only two.
even a full 2.
The news broadcasts, we had Andy Dick doing the weather, which was fantastic. I think my favorite was when he was kind of listing out the different countries, and I noticed there was La Canada, which
Yep.
I would like to believe was them trying to like combine French Canada and like actual English speaking Canada
It had like
into
an
one
accent on
name.
it or something, right?
Yeah, and it had
didn't even
law in
notice
front of
that.
it, and I was like, that's interesting.
So this will be the first time that anyone brings up David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest while talking about Double Dragon. But
Yes, you heard it here first.
but in that book, he wrote that, I believe, in the early 90s and took the logical steps of saying that, like, okay, Quebec is supposed to be separating from Canada, or they're going to be having like their independence vote, and then just said, okay, and it happens. And I wonder if, since this movie comes from 1994, probably written in 1993, when sovereignty issues in Quebec were starting to bubble up again, if that was part of it. Like, look, Canada is actually just, like, maybe Quebec separates and then takes over all of Canada,
Yeah.
and then just calls it La Canada.
See, that's beforehand. I actually did a half scan of Google on like what was happening in 1993 and 1994 that like maybe was informed the political thought behind this film, and I was like, it's not that kind of movie, but sounds like it's a whole lot deeper than I was giving it credit for.
Maybe. I think there's a lot underneath the surface here.
Definitely.
If we start digging into it. To kind of take up that little bit that you were talking about the media and generally just about how they're perceived. There's a couple of scenes where they feature prominently. The first one is when we're introduced to the news anchors. So you have, I believe, George Hamilton, Vanna White, and Andy Dick. And these are just pure entertainers. Like, they are not journalists at all, which to some degree speaks to the situation we're in now, where certain politicians, based on their celebrity, are getting into positions or becoming politicians based on their celebrity status. I won't name names, but I think we all know who I'm talking about.
This is an apolitical podcast here, TJ.
I know. I don't want to bring in any of that bullshit. So that I thought was interesting, talking about how celebrities essentially were required to a certain degree to keep news relevant or to bring in viewership.
Yep.
So later in the film, we mentioned how there was there is a truce between cops and gangs get everything in the evening. But Shuko takes over the gangs, and he wants the gangs to go out after the Double Dragons to get their half of the medallion during the daytime. And this leads to a lot of attacks on citizens and things like this happening during the day.
Too.
And cops. So there is a press conference where the chief of police, who is leader of the Power Corps, Marion's father, he is berated by questions from a couple of journalists. And it seemed like the journalists asking the questions were going out of their way to sympathize with the gangs.
Oh,
yeah.
And this very kind of
100%.
like
It was the worst kind of,
pseudo-liberal, or
left-leaning,
how conservatives and like far-right people see liberals as being like, look, man, you're just sympathizing with the criminals, and that's all your politics are based on. And
I believe they literally said, don't they just need a hug?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The gangs, that is. Yeah.
That is a line in this movie. Don't the gangs just need hugs to get over the fact that they're committing grave acts of violence?
Yep.
But no. So that is really just how the news media is presented in the film. And based on that, do we think there's a kind of more conservative bent to the overall film because of the path that it takes to sort of criticize news media?
It's an interesting point because they do seem to at least touch on the fact that the police have basically surrendered the night.
Yes.
To surrender the night to the gangs, and it's a curfew. And when I first heard the curfew, that made me think, oh, the police are patrolling at this time. Like every curfew I've ever encountered, it usually has, you're not allowed to be out at a certain time because you will be arrested, or the authorities will somehow reprimand you if you're out past this time. But in Double Dragon World, that means that the gangs own the streets. It's almost like the Purge, where you just they control all the streets. There's no police presence whatsoever. And then I guess at dawn or at a certain time, based on daylight savings time or whatever it is, the police unlock their fences and they go back on the streets and they reclaim the day. And so it seemed like there was and even Alyssa Milano's character, the leader of the Power Corps, mentioned that the police were sort of surrendering to the gangs and they weren't doing their jobs. Because her dad, who is the police chief, doesn't realize that she is the leader of the Power Corps. And so she sort of half defends them to him while he's getting ready for work that day. Yep. And she's like, no, they're the ones who are fighting the gangs. You're the ones who gave up and like are letting them do this and or whatever. So there is a little bit of a like, tough on crime, law and order bent to it, but they don't go too deep.
Yeah. There is a joke at the end of the film where they insinuate that the police are grossly underfunded, and I think that could also be seen as kind of as a conservative way of looking at policing, where if you don't have the money, then of course you're going to let the gangs rule the night.
Yes,
and it might be playing into that kind of very mid-90s, and it's even now a fear that if we just let police not do their jobs and not fund them properly, then the criminals will just rule the world, and we will have nothing for ourselves anymore.
Yep. But luckily, Billy and Jimmy helped them out with that when Jimmy is possessing, I believe it was Jimmy. Jimmy is possessing Shuko, Robert Patrick's character.
Yes. Yeah. That's where the joke happens.
Yeah. And then he's able to fund them instantly using the voice command on his, I guess it's a smartphone or like a PDA of some kind.
No,
he's like, give $150 million to the cops. So it's like, I guess that's how e-transfers work in 2007.
He writes so many checks that he needed the equivalent of like a voice activated pager just to like print these things out.
Yeah.
One more thing about the newscast. It really felt to me like they were kind of riffing off of RoboCop's version of that, where you had Oh, geez. Mary Hart, I want to say. No, Lisa Gibbons, and Casey something. I can't remember what his name is now. But they would, in a similar sort of style, present horrifying, terrible news with that sunshine sort of demeanor of just like, look who's on the red carpet. It's like, oh, the Amazon rainforest is on fire. And it literally is on fire now. But you had that similar sort of, you're totally right. Like, you need that celebrity presence in order for people to actually pay attention to the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think maybe to that point, then it might be a good time to talk about some of the other films that Double Dragon kind of riffs on, because I think there are probably numerous examples, and you just mentioning RoboCop made me realize that there was yet another one. Did either of you get the vibe that this film was taking from other films, like was heavily influenced by other films?
I was trying to remember when Escape from LA came out. I want to say it was 97 because
Yeah, Escape from LA was later in the 90s.
so now, strangely enough, I have to look at Escape from LA as possibly a rip-off of Double Dragon. Because a lot of at least of the location elements, a lot of the atmospheric elements are kind of similar. Like, it sort of falls into the bay. Like, I think there's a massive quake, and then it becomes a prison island, and so similar. And like the criminals are running the show again.
Yeah. Sandra, was there any movies for you that stood out that maybe influenced this one or were directly ripped off from?
I would say that I have a terrible memory, so I would not be able to tell you exactly.
So Memento, they ripped off Memento.
Yeah,
didn't
totally.
they?
That was it. That was the one.
So for me, there were a couple of things that stood out, and maybe this is sort of too superficial, but the dragon wagon that they drive seemed very similar to the Ghostbusters car.
Yep, the Ecto One. Yeah,
the Ecto One. I was trying to remember the name of it. Thank you, Tim. There was also the idea of the gangs, and that there are many gangs which have kind of a meeting spot and have like a guy who yells at all of them, and then he dies because Shuko comes in and strangles him with his shadow. It's a nice little scene, which is obviously indicative of the Warriors.
Yeah, no, it's worth mentioning as well. Like, and I'm probably going to do this throughout, but the leader that you were mentioning, who seemed to be sort of like the de facto, or at least the chairman of the meeting of that gang, where it looked like they had taken the set from Thunderstruck, AC/DC's Thunderstruck, which is just a series of scaffolds with a bunch of rags on it, and gathered all the gangs together, is a character actor, Michael Berryman, who you might recognize from The Hills Have Eyes and Weird Science, and he has a very odd, strange look to him.
He does,
and he's just hired as whenever you needed an odd duck, and he deserved more than to get choked by a shadow, but
he was the leader of the Maniacs, though.
The Maniacs, okay,
which I assume that's got to be good.
So he was definitely the proxy for Cyrus from the Warriors, and a lot of the gangs seem to be because they had such distinctive looks and styles and names. You had the Maniacs, you had the clowns who literally looked like clowns, even with the oversized gloves. There was a postal worker who I imagine was part of a gang. There was a gang that was part of that looked like they were schoolboys or school kids of some kind.
There was the Mohawks.
The Mohawks, of course, and the Power Corps. Power Corps, who were not invited to that particular meeting because I think they were like a good gang,
they're the good
a bad gang. And so he wasn't quite as dynamic or charismatic as Cyrus in the Warriors, but you did have that feeling of like, okay, the gangs are all kind of part of this general malevolent force, and they all get together and they have meetings, and then they go disperse later on. So they're like, it's not socioeconomic reasons. They're all just bad people that hang out in nasty places.
I can say that the main villain, Shuko, he kind of reminded me of the evil villain in Resident Evil, but I don't know if Resident Evil came out before.
Resident Evil definitely came out after this. Yeah, Resident Evil was 1999, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of similar vibes. Blonde, kind of black cloak, those weird thin just black glasses. Yeah, just evil.
Evil.
See, now we're finding out that Double Dragon might be one of the most influential films of the early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's influencing everything.
Well, and then it seemed to, I was getting a really strong Rumble in the Bronx vibe from a lot of the fight scenes, because it was, from what I gather of them, the IMDb page, they were trying to make it very accessible to kids, and so the violence wasn't, they actually had to take out a couple of headbutts and some more brutal fight moves in order to get it down to the, I guess, like PG-13 or PG rating or whatever that they needed.
See, I assumed that they were going for something lower than that because of the near the end of the film, there's two moments where someone's supposed to say "oh shit," but they kind of cut away
Yeah,
from
they
it.
get around it,
And
yeah.
it's just kind of like an oh shh. And then it goes quickly to other people being like, you said it. And that seemed like if they wanted, if they wanted a PG rating, they could have kept that in because you're allowed to say shit twice in a PG rated film. Like even the difference between PG and PG-13, like that is still allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is PG-13. I've discovered here, but so they were trying to somehow mitigate that violence, but there was a lot of like comedic sort of pratfallish slapstick type of violence, like bouncing people off car doors and like look behind you and then running away and that sort of business. And I wouldn't say it was particularly well choreographed fight scenes, but they were entertaining. Like you could tell that Mark DeCostas, who plays Jimmy Lee, actually trained martial arts. They wouldn't cut away when he would kick and flip and punch, whereas they would tend to cut away very quickly when Scott Wolf was about to fight somebody because I don't think he's trained.
So before we get into this other point that I wanted to ask Tim, just to sort of close us of idea of what Double Dragon was riffing on and pulling from, the Power Corps, the gang, their headquarters reminded me a lot of where the kids in the original Ninja Turtles film all hung out. A lot brighter than what I remember the Ninja Turtles hangout looking like, but still populated with mostly teenagers and young kids. Lots of video games, lots of stuff going on.
But no menthol cigarettes.
No, of course
Offered to
not.
you by Sam Rockwell. Yeah,
How could there be?
I know, right? It was a cleaner time. It was a nicer time.
But kind of looking at the aesthetic of the Power Corps hangout and sort of for the film in general, and you sort of touched on this, Tim, when you were talking about the slapstick nature of the fighting and kind of the quirky, kooky nature of the entire film. Do you feel that was based on the fact that this is a video game film, sort of full stop right there? Or was that more of a product of the fact that this film is from 1994 and they just had a particular way of making films look back then?
I think they were definitely trying to lean into certain elements from the video game. Like there seemed to be a concerted effort in that final fight sequence of getting your bad guy to fall into the Green River. There were multiple guys that, like, rather than fight them or like get them dispatch them in some other way, it was get them to fall into this green body of water, and you won't have to worry about them ever again. And for my knowledge, in Double Dragon, if you kicked someone off a cliff or into like a body of water, you didn't have to worry about that guy anymore. But that seemed to be the only thing that seemed to like tie in with the video game, except for the literal Double Dragon video game console that was featured towards the end, where I believe somebody kicked somebody else into the console and knocked it over, and so the meta-ness of it nearly broke the whole movie for me right there.
I have a theory about it.
Oh, wonderful! I'd like to hear it. But yeah, the otherwise like the bright colors and the like diverse members of the Power Corps. There was somebody from every different ethnic group was there with amazing like overalls and like bright colored like loose sweaters and shirts and everything. And so it just seemed like this like 90s utopia of everyone having fun and playing video games and getting along. And then these, all the other gangs came in and started trashing the joint.
Would you like to hear my Double Dragon in the movie theory?
Yes, please.
Okay. Earlier in the film, in the scene we talked about where Marion and her father are discussing the Power Corps and whether or not they're terrorists, on the table you will notice a box of Rice Krispies, but they have been altered in a very distinctive way. The Kellogg's logo has been taped over with a Shuko logo. The indication being that Shuko, the main villain of the entire film, is like, based on The Office and how you see him, he's definitely like a corporatist. He's like a big businessman who has his fingers everywhere. Mm-hmm. So the implication of that Rice Krispies box is that he bought Kellogg's. And I think it's safe to say that you don't just get into his Tower of Babylon type thing by just on cereal alone. Mm-hmm. So what if he bought numerous companies, one of them being the video game company that made Double Dragon, and then created the game in order to proliferate the idea of the Double Dragon to thus make it easier to search out the actual medallions?
But wouldn't that increase competition? Wouldn't that have other people looking?
Well, no,
for
because no one's going to play a
medallions?
video game and be like, this is obviously real, I'm going to go try to find these medallions. It's more just like...
This leads perfectly into our next podcast where I talk about The Last Starfighter.
Well, we're not doing your film next, Tim. Although Last Starfighter is going to be great when we eventually do that, because I'm sure we will.
That's an interesting theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
think-
I had a different theory before, but then I just made this new one up, and I'm more convinced by this new one.
This was what fan service or winking was in the 90s, where rather than making any kind of effort to incorporate it into the actual world that you created for your movie, they were just going to be like, you know what kids like? The video game that we're trying to base this on. So let's just put the video game in there, right? Because we got an arcade, so let's put the video game in, and then you'll have a 6-year-old kid going, "There's the video game, Dad," when they see it, and then that's all you need. So I don't know how much thought went into it.
Yeah.
But there was that moment of like 2019 fandom would look at it and going, all right, so if it exists there, then it has to, then somehow it had created this. And like it would, I'm pretty sure they would get into some kind of self-defeating loop that would destroy the whole world.
Speaking also, just quickly before we move on to the idea that this film is sort of tongue-in-cheek and very slapsticky, there were a number of indicators throughout the film that this film is specifically for teenagers and a younger audience. And some of them were so wonderful and just put in your face that I just wanted to mention them quickly. For one, when a Bobo is captured by the Power Core, his torture is eating spinach, which of course it is if your movie is tailored to teenagers.
And sorry, what was a Bobo's first name?
Aboa Bobo, I believe is his full name.
Boa Bobo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Boa Bobo.
Yes.
Boa Bobo.
You got it, Tim. You're never going to forget that now.
Boa Bobo.
Can I just say that scene really made me never want to eat spinach ever again?
Oh my God.
So I think it did its job.
Sandra, you're not a teenage boy.
I'm sorry.
What's going on?
It's very influential.
That's got to be high on the list of like things that they would. It's like, okay, what would be your worst torture? It's like, I don't know, force feeding spinach.
And someone's like, oh yeah, that is terrible.
Yeah.
Even though spinach is delicious and healthy for you.
That is one of the direct correlations to the video game. There is a bad guy named Bobo who
really?
looks somewhat like the mutated version that he eventually becomes after getting tortured in that chair by.
He was injected with microsteroids.
Sorry, microsteroids.
Yes, that was specifically what they said.
Like smaller steroids that
Yes,
he was already
yes.
on. He was already on steroids. I'm pretty sure we established.
I think the idea is that
because he could lift 100, he could bench press 800 pounds.
Yes.
Even though his height and weight were in metric. That one I got stuck on that one too because I was like, wait a minute. So his height. Let me see. His height is 2.2 meters. His weight is 127 kilograms, but he can bench press 800 pounds. What is going on in this world?
Maybe the earthquake only brought part of the metric system
That's right, yeah.
to America.
There's a holdout. It's just like, no, we don't talk about our bench press in metric, you communist.
I'm also curious why they said microsteroids when they couldn't have just, because it looks like he was just on steroids in general. Like they just gave him a huge dose of steroids. Why micro? I don't know.
I think they
guess-
just wanted it to sound more futuristic.
Yeah.
I think.
Science. We're going to use science words.
Steroids.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite lines from the movie, though, where they're like, with our treatment of microsteroids, you'll have the strength of 10 men. And then he just like goffs at them and is like, I already have the strength of 10 men.
It's like, dude, I already got
This
that.
stuff will kill me. And they're like, no, that's a risk we have to take. You're replaceable. Actually, Shuka has a great line there too as well. I can't remember it exactly, but Tim, go on.
I was very confused as to how I was supposed to feel as an audience member about Boa Bobo because he seemed to be a villain that was going to be perhaps either dealt with and never spoken about again, or perhaps like this recurring guy who comes back and menaces them on this like at inopportune times. But then he seems to be an agent of Robert Patrick's character, who I refuse to remember the name of.
Shuko,
thank you. And then he gets so he lets them know. It's like, oh yeah, they've got the other half of the medallion under the, like, it seems like he's in his employ and he's giving him like intel. But then Robert Patrick's just like, we have better uses for you. So he injects him with microsteroids, which makes him just bulk out in all the most disgusting ways, which is also very similar to Ninja Turtles, like Secret of the Ooze styles.
Yep.
More so than the first one. But then he seems to morph into, like, he becomes the villain that sort of chases after them, but they deal with him quite easily, if I remember. They just sort of like bull rush him or Matador styles him. And then he comes back in and he seems to be more sympathetic. Or then he gets tortured by Alyssa Milano with the spinach. But then he seems to come back and he's kind of this roly-poly, like sloth from Goonies kind of guy, where you're just like, he's just sort of misunderstood. He doesn't want to do bad things.
Do you remember the moment where we were supposed to start sympathizing with him? He's locked up. The big fight is happening outside, and there's like some commotion, and he's finally able to free himself from the chains, even though he should have been able to do that easily, considering how strong he was supposed to be.
Well, he's on microsteroids.
Exactly. And he takes a photo of a scantily clad lady off of a mirror and looks at it, and is just like, ooh, hello. And then he looks up into the mirror and sees his face for the first time after being transformed. And he like wipes it off and gets a better look, and then he just realizes he's like, I'm ugly, and he gets really sad, and then he gets super angry, and then he uses that anger to bust through the door, which he also could have easily gotten out of considering how strong he was. And then he doesn't really enter into the fight. He yells at Marion and tells her to hit the power, to turn on the power generator, and then he has some good laughs with his brand new friends. So his entire like redemption arc is realizing that he doesn't meet beauty standards anymore.
Any of them. No, not even standard ones.
Gets sad, get angry, and then does nothing about it other than just yell at someone. So, yeah.
So you're saying
you're right. This film really does pay off everything it sets up.
You're saying he was underwritten somewhat as a character. So there's a massive explosion.
Wait, what are you talking about?
Transitions are hard.
So it seemed like there was a real drive especially in the 90s to do like different kinds of action set pieces. Like you couldn't just have a car chase, you couldn't just have a fight sequence. You wanted to do as many different sort of things as possible to give. It wasn't necessarily for toys, I think, but it was just like let's try to have as many different looks as we can. I guess trailers were getting really important these days, so they wanted to have as much variety as possible to make the movie look absolutely incredible. And so there's a sequence where once again Jimmy and Billy are running away from the gang, and they bust into this little shed, a boat shed, next to the river, which is actually filmed in Cleveland, not Los Angeles, but it does a good job pretending. And they do this amazing red herring where you see this incredible tricked out motorcycle, and you think, oh, they're going to get on this motorcycle, they're going to bust out, there's going to be an amazing chase. And this is like, it has armor plating, and like it looks like it might have a gun or two on it, and it's like, this is going to be a really fun sequence. And then Billy jumps on, tries to hotwire it, and the whole thing falls apart. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that scene isn't the way I thought it was, didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And then you get your amazing, I can see you, no, you can't, and then slap him right in the eye. But then they look at each other when they realize that there is in fact, a boat in this boat shed. And they blast out of it, and they start to make their getaway. And then out of nowhere, 2 jet skis start chasing them. And it seems like those guys are in Robert Patrick's employ rather than just like a random like river gang, but maybe they are a river gang. There are some more environmental concerns about how flammable the water of this particular river is.
Just before the sequence starts, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Tim, there's a wonderful little moment where some people are huddled around a barrel that has a fire burning in it. And in order to make the barrel fire burn hotter, they take a bucket of water from the river and just pour it on the fire. And that makes the fire just ignite.
Yes.
Yes. So that lets you know how flammable the water actually is.
And during the sequence, you have Billy and Jimmy remarking about how combustible the river is and how dangerous it is and how they shouldn't jump in it or they'll melt and this sort of thing. So it really increases the stakes of the boat chase. And then during that chase, somehow, I believe their pursuers have missiles on their jet skis.
Yes, they do.
Which they fire at least one missile that blows up a portion of the shore, which then makes the river catch fire initially, to show you that, yes, Billy was correct in the fact that this was a toxic stew that is incredibly flammable. And then while that fire burns, it's like this ticking clock of like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Somehow it ignites an explosion factory on the side of the river. That it's one of the more impressive explosions I've seen on film. I have to say, and I was not expecting to be impressed by anything in this movie, and that explosion was really quite impressive. And they did it right. They shot it from multiple angles, and they even shot it from a helicopter using like news type camera footage, because they used it later on during the newscast from that angle. And I was like, nobody ever does that. nobody ever shoots it in a way that makes sense for a newscast. They always just repurpose the footage that they've already shot, and then it always looks weird. It's like, well, that's not how like EPKs work, or that's not how like news gatherers shoot their stuff. That looks too clean or whatever. And so I have to applaud the special effects people or the cinematographer or whoever was working that day for getting it out from all those angles, because it's not easy to do, and like you usually get one shot of that. So that was an amazing, incredible explosion. And then apparently the story is, according to IMDb's trivia, they had warned everyone in the Cleveland area that they were blowing the shit out of this place, but it still managed to create a panic, and it led to 210 phone calls to the emergency services over 10 minutes. Because honestly, how many people are actually going to listen to any kind of warnings like that? And wouldn't you be concerned if like a low-grade nuclear bomb went off in your neighborhood? It was, super impressive.
I would be concerned by that, yes. Mm-hmm. That's probably the most exciting thing that's happened in Cleveland for decades.
Hey, it has the Rock and Roll Museum.
Decades. Literal decades. So the explosions were very big and wonderful. What was perhaps more wonderful than those explosions is the illustrious career of the director of Double Dragon. That's something I wanted to touch on here before we go any further. His name is James Yukich. I hope I'm saying that last name properly. Sandra, I'll ask this question to you. Mm-hmm. How many films do you think James Yukich has directed in his career?
I'm going to ballpark and say 5.
If I were to tell you that Double Dragon is his only feature film, would that surprise you?
No.
Hard no.
With that in mind, would you be more surprised to learn that if you were to go to the IMDb page of James Yukich and look at everything that he's done, he has made what I'm going to say is approximately 200 music-related specials of some kind. He's done some other stuff for TV, like he's directed some TV episodes, but almost his entire career is directing either live to television things, like I think there's one here for the MTV Awards of some kind. No, sorry, the 1991 Billboard Music Awards. But he also basically made a career in the early 90s of doing music videos for Phil Collins and Genesis and working with Dennis Miller and doing all of this music-related stuff. Wasp is here as well, the Doobie Brothers, Stryper, if you can believe that, Survivor. Yeah, Pat Benatar. There's just so many music videos and bands that he was a part of. Oh, he did the music video for Iron Maiden's Wasted Years. That's pretty cool. So yeah, this guy does music videos and all of this kind of stuff starting all the way back in like 1983. So 11 years after he started his career working mostly on music videos, he gets Double Dragon. And for the life of me, I couldn't find much information on this. I honestly didn't look that hard because it's been a very busy week. But how do you think someone goes from making the music video for Iron Maiden's Running Free, or the music video for Kenny Loggins' Forever, or the music video for Iron Maiden's Aces High? Oh, this guy is awesome. How do you go from that to Double Dragon?
It sounds like your opinion is slowly getting better and better. It's like, I wasn't so sure about this guy, but based on his Iron Maiden involvement.
Like an hour ago, I'd be willing to say that Double Dragon might have been the high point of his career, and now I'm not sure.
I have a feeling all of those accumulated over time, and he just made the most contacts he could possible, that it just sort of linked up together in some magical way, and he was able to do Double Dragon, and that's what we got.
It makes me wonder if one of these music videos from his illustrious career was somehow related to martial arts or video games in some way, and someone was just like, well, we have the rights to this Double Dragon thing. We can't get in like a Spielberg to do it, but this one guy made this music video that we kind of like, and we think the style fits what we want to do for like an hour and a half long film about people trying to find magical medallions so New Los Angeles doesn't get taken over by a corporatist. And they're just like, yeah, okay, this guy. Yeah, James Yukich, he's our man. The fact that it's his only film is kind of incredible to me also, because this doesn't kill his career. He goes back and continues to do music videos and TV documentaries and all kinds of stuff. Even just recently, he worked with Jeff Beck and Def Leppard and Fall Out Boy.
Wow.
In like the last 3 years. So the guy's still going. He is immune to Double Dragon affecting his career, which I think is pretty incredible. But also, should he have gotten another film? As a feature debut, do you think he does enough here to warrant being given another movie to try to play with?
I would say yes, only because the level of detail. I mean, you look at the movie, it doesn't look like that much on the surface, but there are details hidden in there that are just like so methodical in the way that they're placed, like the cereal box and stuff like that, that I feel like he has potential to do better and like upgrade from Double Dragon.
There's craft on display. Like, as much as we joke about how goofy it is and how strange it all is and how silly it is on the most part, like, there was care and there was consideration put into this entire film, and it doesn't necessarily hang all together by the end of it all, but this wasn't thrown together with like lackluster or just like, we're just going to make a quick buck on this. Like, it seemed to be like they were trying to tell at least a fun story, if not a good story. Mm-hmm. The one thing, though, I will say that if he does make another film, or if he should have made another film, he's not allowed to do any more punch zooms, because he did nothing but punch zoom in this movie. For every time there was a concerning moment, it would be punch zoom into the mouth. And so he needs to. I'm sure he doesn't use that in his concert or music or comedy special work.
I mean, that could be something that's in music videos quite a bit. Like as an aesthetic choice, yeah, I could see that.
Oh, it's very effective. It's very emotionally gripping. Yeah,
maybe that's his signature, his calling card.
Yeah,
he's got to use his calling card.
Yeah. So can I do? Hey, it's that guy now.
Yeah, I just want to also reiterate that we are now all firmly in the James Yukich Please Do Another Film camp. Mm-hmm. If we ever do a Patreon for this, we will include that as a stretch goal where we will fundraise for his next film.
Yep.
He made Double Dragon for the very low price of about $7 million. So
I think Double Dragon 2 is the only way to really go, because I mean, like, it's crying out like Double Dragon. Double,
or what if
double
we did,
down, double up, some kind of fun little subcolon riff or pun.
I mean, what we really need is probably a gritty reimagining of this film with brand new people. Perhaps the people from The Raid.
Oh my God, yeah.
Get those guys to do a Double Dragon film.
Yeah,
I think it'd work out under the clear, masterful direction of James Yukich. I think that could be a thing.
Definitely.
All right, Tim, now you can talk about people who you recognized in this film because you want to seem superior to everybody.
No, absolutely. No, this is it. It's they are not people that are famous. They are not people that are particularly great actors, but they are the workhorses of Hollywood. They are the ones that I always sort of remember are usually the stuntmen, they're the henchmen, they're the bad guys who die in every movie, but sometimes they get a line, sometimes they get a good moment. And there's a few great ones. We mentioned Michael Berryman before from The Hills Have Eyes. There is very quickly, there's War Child from Point Break makes a very quick appearance as Wild One, who is a part of that gang meeting that looks like it's from Thunderstruck set, and he yells one line about something, and he has long wild hair. His name is Vincent Klin, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and he was also the bad guy in the Van Damme classic Cyborg, who did nothing but wear sunglasses. Yep, this is the deep cut when you were dealing with me. And then the other fun one is I've lost his name, the Alyssa Milano's father, who plays the police chief. Mm-hmm. His real name is Leon Rossum. And two interesting things about him. He recently played the old man in the woods in A Quiet Place. And he also played the incredibly memorable Malibu police chief in The Big Lebowski, who told him to stay out of Malibu, deadbeat.
Do you think the Coen brothers were big fans of Double Dragon, and that's why they cast him as a police chief?
I don't know how you could not be. Once you've seen it once, you're just like, okay, well, everyone here needs to be in the movies I'm making.
We'll have to tweet at the Coen brothers after this is all done to see if we can get some clarification on this point, because
Absolutely.
I think that's just too big of a coincidence.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the last two that I feel compelled to bring up because they're fantastic and they're in tons of movies are Robert Patrick's henchmen, who are named Huey and Lewis. And there's apparently a line where he goes, "Huey Lewis, what's the news?" Ta-da!
Wait, that's in the film that we watched that we're discussing right now?
According to IMDb trivia, that's what happened. So but I don't remember it myself.
Oh, this movie.
But they are
rewards
definitely
repeat
called,
watching.
according to IMDb, they are Jeff Imada plays Huey, and Al Leong plays Lewis. And you have definitely seen these guys. If you've watched any action movies from the 80s or the 90s, you have definitely seen these guys. Al Leong was in Die Hard. They were both in Big Trouble in Little China. If you go through their IMDb pages, it's every, like Lethal Weapon, every single movie. Al Leong played Genghis Khan in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, I did recognize him from that.
And they're whenever you need a Asian bad guy or an Asian sort of like martial artist, one of these two guys is in it. And so it's great that they're both in it. And then they have a fantastic moment right at the end where I think it's Al Leong playing Lewis does a little sort of Charlie Chaplin impression, and they do a sort of Abbott and Costello routine where they're basically out of a job because their employer has been killed, and so they're like, well, where should we go? I don't know. Where you should go? And I think it's some bad ADR, but regardless, they are acting their balls off, and they are having so much fun, and I loved it because, like, these guys are actually good actors, but you never get to see it because they're always just sort of scowling in the background, threatening to punch someone. But then they walk off into the night along some along the famous LA bridge, and Al does his little like walking along the curb with 1 foot off, 1 foot on, 1 foot off, and you hear them talking into the night, going like, "Where should we go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go?" And it's just this beautiful little moment right at the end. I was just like, "Oh, that's nice. They got that. That's good for them." Yeah.
I also loved in that scene when they were holding up their signs. If you like took the time to read them, they were quite humorous. I think one of them was "Will hench for food."
Yes. Oh, it's great.
It's actually hard for me to not use evaluative language when talking about this film because it was such a part of my childhood, and there was so much in it. So,
and I discovered that even though I didn't grow up with it, it's hard to be objective about it because I just have so much fun with these kind of movies that are.
This was both your first times watching it, right?
Yeah,
definitely. I had heard of this film, and the closest thing I could get was I think the guy from Party of Five is in it. That's the only thing I knew, and I haven't seen Party of Five. I just know he was.
You haven't seen the spin-off of Beverly Hills 90210?
Was that what that was?
I think they're related to each other somehow.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. But so thank you for bringing me to this amazing
you're both
moment.
You're both very welcome for this.
This
for
is
this,
what
for this
Nostalgic
gift
Goggles
I've
is
given
all
you.
about.
We're about at the end. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't know if you guys saw the news broadcast, but Madonna just wants to be alone.
Oh my
after
God!
her marriage
Yes,
to Tom Arnold.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
Oh, that was amazing. Oh, one other thing. I forgot to mention this. We got off on like another little thing when we were talking about like ways that this film signals to you that it's made for teenage boys. We have the spinach as torture, but then also...
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Do you, Tim?
I do.
Give me one word that lets me know that you know what I'm going to say.
Milano?
No. Okay, that's the third thing. No, the second thing was the film takes great pains in showing us the Vanna White, George Hamilton newscast, and that is like in big, bold letters shown to us as being Channel 102. And so you're like, okay, lots of channels in the future, not really that weird. But then when the film goes on, the news channel that's showing all of the riots and the things that are going on, it's Channel 69. And it's just there over and over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, who's this made for? I don't know. And then Tim, would you like to fill us in on?
There's two very specific moments where first when we meet Alyssa Milano's character, and then later on when they're trying to break into it's not Shokasugi, whatever his name is, Koga Shuko.
Did you even watch this film?
I didn't. It's Robert Patrick to me, man.
It's true.
The T1000, when they're trying to break into the T1000's corporate headquarters, Alyssa Milano, bless her heart, bends over in two different but similar, very provocative ways, and then the two, Billy and Jimmy, both have incredibly 14-year-old boy reactions where I believe they turn their heads. It's like with it, and then they both sort of look at each other and may elbow each other back and forth about like, you're not allowed to look, I'm looking. No, don't you don't look. I get to go first. No, you get to go. I get to go first. So it's it's incredibly sexual in a movie that is not at all sexual. And so it's like these weird little moments that are just like, and then she also is very quickly about the wardrobe. The wardrobe is fantastic in this movie. It's just to watch all the different styles that the gangs go through. And then Alyssa Milano's pants are shorts, but they're also pants because there's like this tenuous connection down the sides. and they really make, you know, as much mileage as they can out of getting her into just sort of different provocative poses. And it's just a weird mismatch of 90s, just like aesthetic and wardrobe and style. And it's wonderful, and I came to it late, but I'm glad I'm here.
Finally, you can now have Double Dragon as part of your life.
Take that off the box.
You can buy the Blu-ray for your children and then say, one of my friends had this in his childhood, and I think you should have it as well.
No, but by the time my children are able to appreciate it, you'll be able to just download it straight into your brain. So no point in buying the Blu-ray now.
Are you scared by the fact that in some time very close in the future, your children might be able to download Double Dragon directly into their brain?
I'm scared all the time, TJ.
The sign of any good parent. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Nostalgia Goggles, where we talked about Double Dragon. I would say maybe one of the best films ever made. Just kidding. That's absolutely not true. But this is what we like to do on this channel. We like having good discussions about films from our past, specifically what we do on this show, at least. We have a bunch of other things on this channel that we would love for you to check out. We do a weekly news wrap-up every week that comes out on Friday. We also have our other podcast, A24 Cult, which will be coming out the week after this one does. And in that one, we're going to be talking about a film called Ginger and Rosa. I'm sure that's going to be a good discussion as well. And, of course, the thing that makes every discussion good is when we get feedback from you guys. So please, after listening to all of this, let us know what you thought about it. If you have your own opinions on Double Dragon, we would love to hear them in the comments below. And I think that's about it. I think that's all we got to say to the listeners who are out there. Hello. And now goodbye. Just before we go, there were 2 lines in the film that Robert Patrick delivers that were fantastic. One of them was when he's very frustrated and he just yells out, "I just want total domination of one major American city." Is that too much to ask? Oh. I was like, dude, your standards are too low. You got to go for the whole country. You got to go for the whole world.
On that note as well, I had one of my favorite moments in the whole movie was when he was, I think, talking to Bobo or Abobo. And then Linda Lash brought the lights up too quickly. And he turned around and reprimanded her. He's like, "Not till I put my sunglasses on." And the facial expression he makes right after that line is priceless. It's just like, he's like, "Not till I put my sunglasses on." And then just makes this like, "You really hurt my feelings." I just love it. I backed it up and watched it 3 times. It was great.
And then finally, one of the closing lines of the film, the last film that Robert Patrick gives us in this film, after he is arrested and has given the check over to the police, he yells out, "If you think I'm bad, wait until you meet my lawyers." And then we're done. He's gone. And just the same, this podcast must end. Goodbye, Cinemateq viewers. There have been so many false endings to this, but this one's for real. Go do something with your life, like watching Double Dragon.
It's not over until I wave goodbye.